Welcome to the Family Answer Man. Today, we're answering your questions about preparation for marriage and the foundational pillars for a healthy marriage from a biblical worldview on the Family Answer Man program. This is David Orgis, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Crosby, the Family Answer Man. This is a time that's designed to answer questions commonly asked in both counseling and church settings. And our goal is to answer general questions from a biblical worldview through the lens of our collective years of experience and education to help you have a stronger, healthier, and happier family. We want to take a minute to thank the incredible people at Winter's Air and Days Smokehouse, the underwriting of today's show. Winter's Air is located in Denham Springs, and it services the Denham Springs and surrounding areas. Days Meat Market is located at 35770 LA Highway 16 in Denham Springs, Louisiana. This is not a therapy session, nor is it advice specific to your situation. Mental health is a very serious issue, and family dynamics are and can often be complicated and dynamic. So for more in-depth answers to your question, we encourage you to seek professional counseling for your specific circumstances. But we hope that today's episode on the Family Answer Man will encourage you and inspire you to make changes that will lead to a stronger, healthier, and happier family. Well, I am David Orgis, and I have a master's in professional counseling. I've got 18 years in ministry. I am ordained. I've been married for 11 years, and I've got 4 incredible kids. Dr. Mark, who's here with us today, has a PhD in family psychology. He has a master's in clinical counseling, a master's of education in pastoral counseling and theology, and a master in law with focus in mediation. He is a licensed professional counselor, a licensed professional counselor supervisor, and a licensed marriage and family therapist. Dr. Mark, we're going to be looking a lot at marriage, preparation for marriage, and the pillars of marriage today on the Family Answer Man program. Can you give us a little bit more insight from your perspective of what is a covenant marriage and what does that mean and what is it good for?
Yeah, covenant marriages are unique in only a few states here in the United States, and Louisiana being one of those, where basically, without getting into too much of the legality, basically what a covenant marriage is designed to do is designed to help couples to understand what they're getting into when they get married. And it requires, I should say, a number of counseling sessions prior to getting married. And then in the event that after they're married, they feel like they need to end this marriage for whatever reason, they are limited on what criteria will allow them to get divorced once they are married in a covenant marriage. Also, too, there is a requirement of counseling after they have decided to end their marriage in a covenant marriage, so that there's counseling in the beginning and counseling at the end, if again it's going in that direction, to help them to understand their various opportunities, their various choices, the various decisions that they're making, so that, again, if they can preserve their marriage if at all possible, then that's the goal. Also, it requires maybe a longer period of time for a divorce to occur in a covenant marriage. So basically what a covenant marriage is designed to do, it's designed to say to the couple, we're going to do everything we can to help you to remain married, to work through the problems so that divorce is not the first option during a time of stress or difficulty.
So covenant marriage is designed to help you be better prepared for marriage and then also not make maybe rash decisions in marriage. I know in the first century, the question came up to Jesus about divorce and what was able to do. Right. And at that point, it was, if you didn't like the bowl of stew tonight, well, you can end the marriage. And so covenant marriage helps to protect against some of the irrational and emotional.
Yeah, because what happens is for so many couples is that, and look, every couple at some stage of their married life are going to go through a difficult season. That's just part of being human, part of living on planet Earth, as they say. And so during that season of difficulty, during that season of stress, during that season of depression or change, whatever it may be, so many couples will see their spouse as the enemy, and they'll say something like, well, let's just get a divorce. And most cases, I think the research is pretty clear, about 75% of those cases, that person doesn't mean that. They're angry. They're wanting to say something that is provocative and hurtful. And by saying something like that, it may create this domino effect of things going in a worse direction. And so the covenant marriage is designed to hit the brakes on that sort of thing. It's designed to say, wait a minute, we're letting our emotions, we're letting, our anger get the best of us. Why don't we just hit the brakes and rewind a little bit and see if we can't work this out in a healthier and better way? And so that's what the covenant marriage is designed to do. Because so many times when a person, throws out those words, well, let's just get a divorce. To me, I explain it to couples, it's like waving a gun. You're waving a gun around, eventually that gun's going to go off. And so it is with the couple who says, the person who says, well, let's just get a divorce. Eventually, that gun's going to go off. And so what the covenant marriage is designed to do is to slow things down, hit the brakes. Let's pick up, all the potential problems that we are dealing with, and let's try to unpack this in a healthier manner.
So I know when my wife and I were getting ready to get married in 2011, we decided to get a covenant marriage. And for us, one of the things that we felt like we wanted to express to each other through doing that, having a covenant marriage, was just that we were committed to the highest level of commitment that we could possibly be, not only, in the eyes of the state through a covenant marriage, but also in the eyes of God through, a marriage that was done by a pastor in a church, and something that we wanted to commit, that no matter what, for us, both of us, we talked beforehand, it was, one of those decisions that from the get-go and the outset, hey, divorce just isn't an option. Let's live our lives in a way and build our marriage in a way that was going to be honoring to God, honoring to each other, and even in our failures, knowing that we were going to be committed to each other in everything, with everything that our marriage vows express to each other. Right. And so, covenant marriage for us was kind of that icing on top of the cake. It was a little something extra, a little cherry on top that said, hey, you know what, this is the highest level of commitment that we can get from, a legal standpoint. So let's do it, because we want to express that from the very outset of our marriage. So we are going to be answering on the Family Answer Man today some questions about marriage and about preparation and the pillars of a good, strong marriage on the Family Answer Man program. So the first question that we had written in is submitted. It says, my daughter is getting married in a couple of months. She's asking what she needs to know to have a healthy marriage and avoid some of the mistakes that her friends have made. So on the Family Answer Man, help us hear what are some of the biblical things that we can do to have a healthy marriage and avoid some of the mistakes that maybe others have fallen into. Right.
Just real quickly, as far as on a scriptural perspective, there's two main things that the book of Ephesians talks about. Number one, it talks about, husbands, love your wives the way Christ loves the church. And so I think what needs to happen is that men need to have this sense of love, a sacrificial love. They need to know going in that my love for her is as Christ loves the church, which is this sacrificial, committed, agape, unconditional sort of way. And so that sacrificial agape love needs to be the kind of love that a husband brings into the marriage. On the flip side of that, the wife is to respect her husband. So you have love and respect from husband to wife, and then from wife to husband, respect and love. And so when love and respect is given and respect and love is given, then you have the core foundation of a happy marriage. Very interesting to note, Dr. John Gottman years ago did some research on what is required and needed, the basics of a happy marriage, and he discovered love and respect and love. Again, something that the Apostle Paul said under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit 2,000 years prior, this is what is needed. So that's the foundational premise. However, I'll also add that there are 6 major areas when you look at what holds up a marriage that I think young couples need to understand, couples that are preparing to get married, couples that are newly married, and even those who have been married 25 years. There are 6 things that I will encourage a couple to think about. Now, think of these 6 things as maybe when you go see your physician and your physician says, well, let's kind of give you a checkup. Let's look at your cholesterol. Let's look at your heart rate. Let's look at, your lung capacity, breathing, whatever. And so there are certain things that every marriage needs to have to kind of check off to see if it's a healthy marriage. And so in no particular order, I'll begin with this. Number 1, finances. It doesn't matter if you make $50,000 a year or $500,000 a year. It is important for the couple to have a good understanding as well as a cooperative understanding of how we're going to manage our finances. And so managing the finances is crucial because, again, if you have one who's a spender and one's a saver, you may have some difficulty there, financially speaking, and also now you create some discord because one wants to save and one wants to spend. So having a healthy understanding of what the other one is wanting and needing, expecting, and managing the finances is very important. Now, we could spend a lot of time on each one of these, so I'm just going to give you the abbreviated version. So finances is important. Do you have a good understanding, a good cooperative understanding of how we're going to manage our money? Number two is intimacy. Now, intimacy has several levels. Intimacy of our emotions. Are we willing to share our emotions? When we're feeling angry, do we admit it? When we're feeling sad, do we admit it? If there's something bothering us, do we admit it? I mean, how many times has a husband said to a wife, what's wrong? And she goes, nothing, nothing. Well, everybody knows something's wrong. It's important that you share that. And the reason why some don't is because there is a fear of intimacy. If I tell you what's really wrong, you may not understand it. You may push back. You may be defensive. You may, be critical or whatever. But intimacy is important. Of course, there's emotional intimacy. There's physical intimacy. These areas of intimacy are very, very important. And do we have a good understanding and a freedom of sharing intimacy in our marriage? So understanding what that means is very important. Thirdly, spiritual agreement. The Word of God makes it real clear about being unequally yoked, and generally what that means is a believer with a non-believer. But even if you have two believers, do we know where we want to attend church? Do we have agreement in our Bible study and in our prayer time? And do we have agreement in our theological perspectives and views? So having a spiritual harmony is very important, and growing in that spiritual harmony, worshiping together, praying for one another, sharing maybe what you heard God speak to you about or revealed to you, maybe going through a difficult time and you're sharing with your spouse, hey, this is where I think God is leading, or this is where I feel that God wants from us, or these are the doors that God is opening, but being free and sharing your spiritual experience with the Lord and opening up with one another and having that spiritual agreement. To me, it's a very sad commentary. And again, it happens, but it's a sad commentary when maybe the husband goes to church and the wife doesn't, or the wife goes to the church and the husband doesn't, or both parents drop the kids off and the kids go to church but the parents don't. There is something about worshiping together. There's something about sharing that moment together that is so powerful, so important. So finances, intimacy, spiritual agreement. Number four, it would be having a similar parenting philosophy. Now, again, as we said before, all of us were raised differently. And so, there are some parents who say, we believe in timeout. And some parents say, well, I believe in corporal punishment. Now, if there is a differing parental philosophy, now we have a problem. Or some parents will say, I want to be my child's friend. And the other parent goes, no. Our kids have enough friends. We need to be our child's parent. We need to be our child's coach, if you will. And so having a similar parenting philosophy is so powerful and so important. Number five, the fifth pillar I will use, if you're kind of taking notes, these are the pillars I will argue of a healthy family. But the fifth pillar is having boundaries with your exes and in-laws. How many times have I dealt with a couple where there was an ex, maybe an ex-husband or an ex-wife or ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend that still wants to, quote unquote, keep in touch? If there's not proper boundaries there, that can lend itself to some problems. That's also true with in-laws. There's a lot of in-laws that want to run the family of their son or daughter. And if you don't have proper boundaries with your exes or your in-laws, that can be problematic. And number six, again, these are all abbreviated, but number six is, what is our thing? And if so, as I say sometimes to audiences, if you've tuned out, tune in on this one. Turn the radio up a little bit on this one, because our thing, your thing with your spouse is very important. What I mean by that is this. I think every couple throughout their marriage needs to have that one area, that hobby, that area of interest that they do together. Camping, boating, fishing, whatever it is that you enjoy doing, hiking, whatever it is. Some couples love to go, on cruises, Carnival Cruise Line or Norwegian or whomever, and just have, a great time a couple of times a year. Okay. But having that one thing that you talk about, that you think about, that you plan, that, as the old saying goes, if we can't talk about anything else, we can always talk about that. That one thing, or that our thing, is so very important. My wife and I, interestingly enough, back in the 90s, our thing back then, of course, it can change over time, but our thing back in the 90s, we were both karate tournament fighters. We would go to various tournaments throughout the country, primarily in the Southeast, and we would compete. And we would talk about getting ready for tournaments, and when the tournament was over, how we did, and the competition that's on the horizon. That was our thing, is my point. And we loved doing that, and we worked out and shared and competed together, and it was such a neat time in our married life. And of course, it changes, it evolved into other things, but whatever that is, enjoy it and share it. For some people, maybe something as simple as, a dinner and a movie every Friday night. Okay. But whatever that one thing is, or our thing is, make it powerful. So finances, intimacy, spiritual agreement, parenting philosophy that's similar, boundaries with exes and in-laws, and knowing what our thing is.
That's some really good advice, and 6 really practical areas for people to look at when they are preparing for marriage and for a healthy marriage. Exploring I guess for all of our sakes and for our listeners especially, explore what does it look like when somebody is going through their preparation for marriage. I mean, we spend so much time in our culture preparing for a wedding, right? Thousands of dollars, hundreds of hours of time. For preparing for a marriage is more valuable, a lot less visible a lot of times. So looking at these 6 areas: finances, intimacy, spiritual agreement, compatibility in parenting philosophy, boundaries with exes and in-laws, and what is our thing. What would be maybe the way that you would suggest somebody go about having those discussions as a couple before they get married?
Yeah, I think it's very important that, again, we understand going into marriage what marriage is going to require of us. And sometimes we don't. All we know is we're in love, she's pretty, he's handsome, we're compatible, and we just want to live life happily ever after. And that's our story to some degree for the most part. But if you do not understand the power and the importance of these 6 areas, if you do not build your marriage, your home on these 6 pilings, what begins to happen is that if one gets weak, again, think of these as all pilings that you're building your house on. If one gets weak, it's going to put stress on the other 5. If 2 are weak, it's going to put stress now on the other 4. And if 3 get weak, your house is going to start to tilt. And if 4 of them get weak, your house will eventually fall. And so the point simply is this: knowing this going in, hearing about this, preparing for this, asking ourselves, okay, so what does our finances look like? How much debt do we have going into the marriage? How much debt are we willing to go into? What is our goal and our plan for paying down our debt? What's our goal and our plan for saving money? What's our goal and our plan, for giving, maybe to the church? I mean, how do we see us managing our finances? And so going into this is so powerful and so important. Back to children. It's amazing to me the number of couples that never talk about how are we going to raise our children, or how many children we're going to even have, or do we have any children at all? I mean, I've dealt with a lot of couples who, after their 3rd year of marriage, he's wanting children and she's not. And the reality is they never talked about it prior to marriage. So I think sometimes it's important that in the premarital work that the pastor or the counselor or whoever's preparing this couple needs to cover these 6 areas. And so I just want to take a brief moment, because I know a lot of pastors listen to this program. Pastors, here are 6 things that I want you to encourage you to think about and to talk about with the couple that you are preparing for not only for their wedding day, but for their marriage. So unpacking these, you can spend an entire hour session on each one of these 6 areas preparing the couple for their marriage.
And pre-marriage counseling is so important. It's so critical, because it's a practical way to have somebody help guide you through these discussions. Sounds like the question that we got was a mother or a father that was helping their daughter, their child, prepare for their marriage. And so, like you said earlier, if you're taking notes, these are 6 great categories to pass on. If someone's preparing to get married, these would be 6 categories. It'd be great to say, hey, you know what? Let's have 6 times that we're going to talk about these different areas, maybe 30, 45 minutes, an hour, that we're going to discuss each of these and really unpack them in depth.
Yeah, and reading about this. I mean, there's a lot of books about this. There's seminars, there's videos, etc., that you can watch on these areas. And here's a question I sometimes get, and I'm sure we'll be feeling this question as well down the road. But the question I sometimes get is, so what is the one thing that every couple needs to have a happy marriage. And sometimes I'll ask that question to various groups or maybe to various couples. And some will say, well, you got to have love. Well, I know people who love each other who can't live together. Okay. And some will say, meaningful communication, and that's important. But I know a lot of folks who can communicate, but still don't do very well together. So the question is, so what's the one thing? And I will argue it's the word knowledge. I think part of the problem with most of us going into marriage is that we don't have the depth of knowledge that is needed. And that's not being critical. That's just simply saying very few people took a course. Very few people read a book. Very few people passed a test to get married or to get a marriage license. And we've all heard this, to get a driver's license, you have to practice, you have to have a coach, you have to pass a test, you have to prove to someone that you're capable of driving, knowing the rules of the road, and the list could go on. But with marriage, all you need is someone to say, okay, and show up, and they give you a license, and find someone who will sign off on your license, and you're good to go. And you're not quite sure what to do, the most important relationship of your life, and you don't know what to do. And so that's why, again, I really want to encourage pastors and counselors and others out there to really encourage those who are planning getting married to spend some time preparing and spend some time just trying to understand what are some of the pillars that are needed.
That's really good advice and insight. And again, those 6 pillars for everyone that's out there and listening: intimacy, finances, spiritual agreement, compatible parenting philosophy, boundaries with exes and in-laws, and what is our thing. You mentioned, Dr. Mark, what is the one thing, and you just answered that, family answer man, the one thing, knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So another question that we had was, goes really well with that, and is the opposite is, what should couples avoid moving into marriage? Or maybe they are already in marriage and you're looking to revamp and strengthen your relationship with your spouse. What are some things that we should avoid that are going to undermine and subvert those pillars that you already talked about?
Right. Back to Dr. John Gottman. He did some research on this area, and he concluded that if these 4 things are in your marriage, and he calls them the 4 horsemen of marital apocalypse. He said, if these 4 things come riding into your marriage, he says your marriage has a 96% chance of failing.
That's a really high number.
Yeah. And so these are some areas that we're called to guard against, if you will. Number 1, criticism. Again, when I say criticism, I'm not saying that, oh my goodness, you put too much salt, in the gumbo or whatever. But when you're critical and your criticism is mean-spirited, and your criticism has to do with maybe something the person cannot help, maybe their appearance or something along those lines. And so when a person is critical and they say hurtful, critical things, that tears away at a person, it tears away at their confidence, it tears away at the marriage. So when a person is critical of the other one, again, saying deriding things, mean-spirited things, unfortunately, using profanity or whatever. But when you are being critical of your spouse in a mean-spirited way, that's number 1. Yeah, go ahead.
Just real quick, one of the things that I think is really helpful and that I have heard that I like, and it's a phrase that I think is really beneficial, and maybe to this as well, is that it's important to attack problems and not attack people. Because there are things that we have to talk about in marriage and things that we're going to have to talk, hey, we need to do this differently. This isn't working out. This isn't appropriate. But we attack problems and we don't attack people.
Right. Problem solving is crucial. And I'll say this throughout our program, as long as we're on the air, whatever, there is a difference between drama and problem solving. And like we said before, so many people land in the drama camp and they never solve the problem. Drama camp or landing or being dramatic, if you will, is easier than solving the problem. So number 1 is that mean-spirited, deriding criticism of your spouse. Number 2, very similar to the first one, is contempt or disrespect. When you no longer respect your spouse, maybe who they are, what they do, the work, the effort, when everything you say or you do about them is very disrespectful. So showing them contempt. So criticism, number 1, contempt, number 2. Number 3, I think all of us at some point can identify with this third one, and that is being defensive. Your spouse says something and you push back. Your spouse says, if you would just do this, and you, oh, look at what you do. Look at what you do. And all of a sudden it's on, right?
Right.
Instead of saying, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to take care of that. Oh my goodness. I'm going to, make sure that doesn't happen again or whatever. There's that pushback. There's that defensiveness. And then when you become defensive, then your spouse then becomes defensive. And then they push back even harder and you defend even more. And before you know it, this craziness begins to occur because all of us have this natural inclination to be defensive whenever someone says something that we should or should not have done. Sometimes it's good just to pause and hear what your spouse has to say, make a note of it, a mental note of it, let them know, I'm going to work on this, I promise, I'm so sorry, it's okay to apologize. Because defensiveness creates, again, a crazy cycle. So again, number 1, criticism. Number 2, contempt. Number 3, defensiveness. Number 4, and this is where, again, I'm kind of lean on, the men in our audience, and that is stonewalling. Men know, consciously or subconsciously, if they stonewall or basically withdraw or disconnect, ever how you want to put it, that brings a sense of fear into the heart of their spouse because they're detaching. And attachment, and we'll talk about this more in the future, but attachment is crucial in our marriages. So when a man stonewalls, you're disconnecting and you're detaching, and that is painful, not only to the wife, but also to the marriage. So if we can avoid those 4 things, you'll have a healthier and happier marriage.
So you talked early on about the compatible nature of love and respect and love. And I really appreciate that you put both of those attributes with husband, love and respect. Right. With wives, respect and love. You can't separate those two. No. Both need to be conveyed to each spouse.
Correct.
Primary emphasis, men need to be respected, women need to be loved, but men also need to be loved and women also need to be respected.
Exactly.
And that sounds a lot like the opposite of what you just talked about and mentioned of that kind of that crazy cycle that can get in when you're defensive and we want to, we don't necessarily want to hear what our spouse has to say because sometimes it's hurtful and painful when somebody touches on something that may be truthful and accurate.
Exactly.
So the Family Answer Man, here with us, Dr. Mark. Thank you so much again for passing on your knowledge and your insight. We want to thank you for joining us again as the incredible people of Winter's Air and Days Smokehouse and Specialty Meats have underwritten today's show. Winter's Air, located in Denham Springs, Louisiana, with services in the Denham Springs and surrounding areas. And Days Specialty Meats and Smokehouse is located at 35770 LA Highway 16 in Denham Springs. And as a reminder, this is not a therapy session. This is not advice that's specific to your situation. Mental health is a serious issue. Family dynamics can and are often complicated and dynamic. And we have not given specific advice today to your situation, but hopefully have answered questions that will encourage you, inspire you, and help you make the changes that will lead to a stronger, healthier, and happier family. If you would like the Family Answer Man to answer any questions for you coming up in the future, you can email familyanswerman@loumc.org or soundradioinfo@milldale.org. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Family Answer Man. We hope you have a great week.